Hello, you silly goobers. Somehow Palpatine returned, and in this situation, Palpatine it's me. I'm Palpatine because I have returned. I spent the past year living overseas, and I haven't had as much time to make YouTube videos as I would have liked, but now that I'm back in the motherland of good old US of A, I plan on getting back to posting regularly on YouTube. And I figured there is no better way for me to hop back into this cyberspace than by giving you an updated list of my top 10 favorite sci-fi fantasy series of all time. And yes, I am including manga. I don't know why I have to put this disclaimer every time I do this, but last time I did this video, people were clowning on me because I had 2 manga in there, and spoiler alert, it's the same with that in regards to numbers. I do have 2 manga on this list. Is it mangas or manga? What is the plural here? Is it mangas? Because that sounds weird. That's like saying animes. It's just manga, right? Does anyone know the answer to this? I don't know. Anyways, folks, let's hop right into this, okay? At number 10, I have the Locked Tomb series by Tamsin Muir. This is a really unique reading experience for me because I actually am not a huge fan of this first volume, Gideon the Ninth, but I absolutely loved Hera the Ninth, which is book 2, and I also loved book 3, Nona the Ninth. These 3 books are just so different from each other that I feel very comfortable putting the entire series on my list because they're all very unique in their own way. Tamsin Muir just has such a fresh and original voice and approach to story. She's also mashing up so many genres within these books because they're part horror, part fantasy, part sci-fi, part romance, and they have all these elements that are just swirling together to create this whole new pie of writing that I've never really experienced in other series. And because of that, the tone and the atmosphere within these books feels so compelling. I would say if you're going to pick up this series and you aren't a huge fan of Gideon the Ninth, I encourage you to go to the next one because it is very different. But I've also heard the inverse. I've heard people who loved Gideon the Ninth and then they read the second book and they hated it. So it really is one of those series where I think there's something for everyone, but some people are not going to like other aspects of it, and that's fine. But I also think that's the mark of a work of fiction that is just being so bold that it's gonna be polarizing. At number 9, I have the Broken Earth Trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. This is a weird one for me because it peaked for me in book 1, the 5th season. The way that N.K. Jemisin plays with plot structure and character voice within this book is so well done. I loved the way she played around with all of that and tied it into the central mysteries and the world building within this book. It was so compelling at every single turn. It was hard to put down this book. And when everything comes together at the end, it blew my mind. It just was so perfect in every single way. And then books 2 and 3 carry that forward in some ways, but I did feel like they were slower and less compelling because, to me, the biggest mysteries were all solved in the first book. I know a lot of people that agree with me on this. I also know people that disagree with me on this. I'd say books 2 and 3 are more emotionally compelling, but the rest of the narrative didn't engage me as much. So I still think that the trilogy as a whole works really well, but man, that first book in particular, just mwah, mwah. This is sort of like if someone wrote an apocalyptic adult fantasy series where earthbenders are real. If that doesn't sound cool to you, I don't know what to tell you. At number 8, I have Berserk by Kentaro Miura. I actually have a tattoo from Berserk right here. This is the brand of sacrifice. If you've read Berserk, you know what it is. If you haven't read Berserk, I encourage you to read Berserk, though do check your trigger warnings because it is extremely dark. But if you read it and you see this symbol, just know there's some shit that's about to go down, okay? This is one of my favorite character studies I have ever read in my life. I think Guts is a fascinating protagonist. He has so many layers to him, and the things he goes through in this series are just... It's really, really heavy stuff, but the way that his character progresses, the way that he advances through this plot, and the way he changes as a person, I find to be both incredibly inspiring and incredibly relatable, even though the things that he goes through are things that I would hope that nobody else ever has to go through. And on top of that, the cool factor, okay? A guy that just walks around with a giant 2-handed sword is never not gonna be cool, alright? That is literally one of the coolest character designs of all time. I will stand by that. If you've ever played Dark Souls, if you've ever played Elden Ring, it's all inspired by Berserk. Actually, a lot of dark fantasy has been inspired by Berserk, and for a reason. Kentaro Miura's artwork is just off the charts. His monster designs are just so incredible, and the story he is telling is so emotionally poignant. It's just an amazing series, and I wish that I could recommend it to more people, but because it's a manga, it's really hard to get people into it, and the anime is not as great as the manga, which I can't really blame it for not being as good, because this artwork is amazing. I have the artwork framed back here. This one right here, that is a panel from Berserk, and I have it framed because it's just that beautiful. Also within this series, the themes that it's exploring and the way that it displays those themes through its protagonist and its antagonist, who I think is probably my most hated antagonist I've ever read in my entire life. I don't know how he managed to weave together all of these elements, but he did, and it works, and I love Berserk for it. At number 7, I have The Realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb. This is the first book of the Farseer trilogy, Assassin's Apprentice. I read the Farseer trilogy, I want to say like 2 or 3 years ago at this point, and I absolutely loved it. I think that Robin Hobb is a master of character, and especially within this series, Fitz is just so well written. He's the main point of view character throughout this series. He just feels so real. He is so realistically flawed, and his relationships with all the other characters in this feels so believable. Right now, I'm actually reading The Live Ship Traders, which is the next trilogy within the Realm of the Elderlings, and it is also just a masterpiece of character work. Robin Hobb is so good at writing character dynamics and character development, and she centers the entire narrative around this, but she also manages to introduce so many fascinating world-building elements that are also compelling on their own, but we're seeing them through the eyes of these characters, so our perception of these mysteries is also influenced by what they are interested in, because she never deviates from character. And Robin Hobb is also very immersive as a writer. I feel totally sucked into her worlds, and also she's really good at making you feel things. So if she wants you to love someone, you're gonna love them, okay? You're gonna love them. She's really good at writing lovable characters, but if she wants you to hate someone, oh boy, you're gonna hate them a lot. 2 of my most hated characters of all time are in this series. Goddamn Regal Farseer and Kyle Haven, they can go both themselves. I hate them so much, dude. I don't know how she does it. She's really good at making me hate people, and I love that about the series, actually. Although her stories are pretty depressing and pretty bleak, and I am scared for how The Live Ship Traders is gonna end. I only have 1 book left, and I just know that it's not gonna be happy. At number 6, I have The Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee. This is Mistborn meets The Godfather in a fictional Asian country controlled by the Yakuza. Dude, that's awesome. The cast of characters that Fonda Lee has assembled throughout this trilogy is so well connected. Again, I am a man of character, and I feel like the cast within this trilogy is just perfectly written. I love the Call family, and I love the antagonist. I think she is also perfectly written. And the way that we follow these characters throughout their lives, because at the beginning of this trilogy, they're all pretty young for the most part, and we get to see them as they grow up, as they have children. We get to follow their children for a little bit, and we get to see how this prolonged gang war affects all of their lives and affects their development and the way they view the world, the way they behave, and that is just so interesting of a way to explore a conflict like that. Instead of it being about these big clashes, and there are big clashes throughout this series, but instead of centering the narrative around this, it is so much more focused on the psychological effect that these things would have on characters. And the backbone of all of this is the cultures that she has created in this series. This is more akin to urban fantasy, I would almost say. It doesn't take place on Earth necessarily, but it is very like Earth, and the way that she has developed all of these nations within this and made them crucial to the conflict at the center of this narrative, and the way that these characters interact with all of that. I don't know how she managed to build all of this within just 3 books. Honestly, when I finished this trilogy, it felt like I had read like 5 or 6 or 7 books, but it's just 3. I don't know how she managed to cram so much narrative into just 3 books and so much world building into just 3 books and not have it feel like she's ever rushing anything. I don't know how she did that. I cried my eyes out when I finished this trilogy. I think Jade Legacy in particular is basically perfect. This is just such a fantastic book, and it will crush your heart. It will rip it out and just throw it on the ground and stomp on it. But you know what? We live for that, don't we? As readers, we live for that kind of shit. I don't know what's wrong with all of us, right? We must all have something wrong in our heads, right? At number 5, I have the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. I think there are probably people who will be surprised that this isn't higher for me, but let me explain. Also, I have a Stormlight Archive tattoo right here. Bridge 4, baby, let's go. Brandon Sanderson is a master of world building. This is by far his biggest world, and I feel like it's probably the most interesting out of all of them. His magic systems never disappoint. This is no exception here. The way he ties those magic systems into character development and into world building, I don't know if anybody is quite doing it like him. But really what makes the Stormlight Archive so special is that it is the pinnacle, in my opinion, of blockbuster fantasy writing. And what I mean by that is that this is a crowd pleaser. It's going to make you cheer, it's going to make you cry, it's going to give you all of the emotions that you would get while watching like a big blockbuster movie in a theater, and that's what Brandon Sanderson does so well in this series. The cast is just so easy to root for, they're so relatable, and I feel like this is more emotionally poignant than people give it credit for. Brandon Sanderson can be incredibly insightful on the way that he's written these characters to have very relatable problems that they're going through. These are very heavy on the mental health issues that these characters are going through, and the way that they overcome them using the magic of this world, yes, but also by just learning things about themselves in a way that we as real people can relate to is just so well done. I think Brandon Sanderson is very good at that, and I think that's a very underrated part of his writing. This is one of the most immersive reading experiences of my life. Also, I feel like rarely am I ever this transported by a work of fiction. The Stormlight Archive is just so big, so huge, the world is just so unique that I'm just sucked right in every time I sit down to read it. At number 4, I have the First Law series by Joe Abercrombie. I've said it once, I'll say it again, nobody does character like Joe Abercrombie. He is the master of morally gray characters. I feel like I could pontificate on literally every single cast member from all of these books and whether or not they're evil or good, and I could just talk myself in a circle for hours and hours and hours because they're all so flawed and they're all so dynamic in the way that they approach themselves. My favorite character in the entire series is Logan Ninefingers, and I still don't know if he's actually just an evil motherfucker or if he's a good person. I don't know how I feel about him, but I think that's the genius of the series, is that I don't know how to feel about him. I like him. I liked rooting for him in this series, but the more you learn about him, the more I'm like, man, this guy kind of sucks, but also I really like him. And that's kind of like the whole cast. That's the whole cast of all of these books. I just don't know how to feel about them, and that's genius. Joe Abercrombie is also a master of thematic writing. The way that these character arcs end at the end of each of the books and at the end of each of the trilogies is just perfect. I feel like he never strays from the themes he sets up. And he's also so good at subverting fantasy tropes. Like, he inserts these fantasy tropes that seem like you know where they're gonna go, and then he just upends them. He just turns them on their head, and you're like, oh crap, I actually had no idea where he was going with any of this. These books are brutal, they're funny, the action in them is so intense. Abercrombie also has a very unique authorial voice, and that really comes through in his writing. I think of the First Law series, The Age of Madness is my favorite, but man, this OG trilogy has such a special place in my heart. I feel like this opened my eyes to like a whole new way of looking at fantasy and looking at character. Abercrombie is just so damn good at writing characters. I feel like this is the new bar for me in terms of writing dynamic characters. I just don't know if anybody else is going to be able to match up to that. At number 3, I have the Malazan Books of the Fallen. This is by far the hardest series to pitch, like maybe ever. I don't know how to explain this series to anyone. I don't know how to tell them what they're getting into. I just tell them, hey, it's extremely complicated. You're going to be very confused. It's also super dark. It has every single trigger warning you can imagine. And that puts a lot of people off from it, understandably. And I feel like a lot of people start this series and they just never really get past book 1 even because it is extremely confusing and extremely dense. And Steven Erikson has a very dense writing style sometimes. But when all of those narrative threads come together, when all of those mysteries come together, when all of the confusion comes together, it is the most epic shit you will ever read in your life. It happens once every book, essentially. At the end, everything comes together, and it is just jaw-droppingly epic. This is just so sprawling and so massive that when those moments happen, the scope of them, the scale of them is just unmatched. I think it's literally impossible to write the scale of epic that Malazan accomplishes without being as complicated as it, which is why it works. It's so ambitious in what it's trying to tackle, and I feel like Steven Erikson somehow pulled it off. These books are also very philosophical. He has a lot of musings that he'll go on throughout this series that just really make you think, and not everyone likes that, but that's what Steven Erikson is interested in exploring. And in terms of lore and world building and history and just cultures, dude, I don't even remember half of this shit because it's just so big that there's no way one brain can contain it all. I feel like Steven Erikson probably doesn't even remember everything because there's just so much. It literally feels like if you took all of the cultures of Earth and you tried to explain all of them in 10 books. It's nuts, but I love it so much because of the way that everything comes together, the way that Steven Erikson pulls this off. I don't know how it's even possible. I don't know how he wrote these books. He must have some kind of witch on hand that's like hexing his mind while he's trying to write and like forcing him to push through all the things that would, you know, trip up a lot of other authors. But my God, this series, it just works. It just works. And if you get it, you get it. But I also understand why a lot of people don't like it or just don't want to give it a try. Like, I get it. Believe me. At number 2, I have the Sun Eater series by Christopher Rocchio. If you follow me on TikTok, this is not a surprise. Even on my YouTube page, I think I have 2 full videos talking about Sun Eater. I don't know for sure if that's true, but I love this series. It has my new favorite protagonist of all time in Hadrian Marlowe. His journey, his character development, his voice, his emotions, everything about it just works for me. It works so well. I don't know that I've ever been this sucked into a fantasy series. This is science fantasy, so it kind of walks that line of science fiction and fantasy. And because I'm so connected to Hadrian, the emotional moments in this, the heartbreak that he goes through, the struggles he goes through, dude, they just really hit me in ways that I've never experienced before. And like with Malazan, these books are just so epic, dude. Christopher Rocchio knows how to write epic moments, and a lot of people are put off to the series, I think, for similar reasons to Malazan. This is way less complex than Malazan, but it is a very long, slow burn to reach those epic moments. The scope of this series is unlike anything I have ever read before, and the fact that it's a 7-book science fantasy epic that is entirely in first person, and it never gets stale, it never gets boring. I don't know what kind of drugs is this man taking that he's able to pull this off? I don't know. It's just so rich. It has so many things to dig into, so many things to unpack. The lore, the world, the history, the characters, all of it just has so many layers that you can peel back constantly. So when I'm reading this book, I feel like I'm constantly pausing when I'm reading this series just to digest everything that's going on and letting it fully hit me. One thing I feel like is under talked about with this series is how good Christopher Rocchio is at character voice. There are no lines in this entire series that I feel like he wrote instead of Hadrian Marlowe, because Hadrian is the one who is narrating this series, and it genuinely feels like he is the one writing this series. It doesn't feel like Christopher Rocchio is the one writing. Hadrian's story throughout this is just so well done. And really at the core of this series is that relationship that I feel like I have with Hadrian. He feels like such a real person to me while also feeling almost like this mythological Greek god of a figure in some ways. And having that connection with him as he goes through these larger than life events just makes me so connected to everything that's going on. I genuinely can't praise this series enough. Everything that I've said about these other series, I am saying it about this too. It has all of those elements and it works so well for me. This is my taste done to perfection. And number 1, if you know me, you know the answer already. It's One Piece. I will forever and always genuinely feel bad for the people who chalk this up to being the silly pirate anime, because I promise you, this has as much depth as any one of the series I just listed. Oda's ability to write emotional moments, I don't know that anyone has ever been able to do it quite like him. Like I was saying with Sun Eater, where I feel so connected to Hadrian as a character, I feel the same way about the Straw Hat crew as a whole. They really truly feel like family to me, and being able to go on this epic journey with them is such a special experience, and I think it's something that can't really be replicated, because this is a story that's almost 30 years in the making now, all from the mind mind of one man who is just so passionate about his craft and about the story he's creating that he continues to evolve as a writer. He continues to make this world so creative and so imaginative, and I just don't think we're ever gonna see that again, and I don't think it's ever been done before. And that's not even to speak of all the themes that Oda is writing on, all of the plot threads that he's managed to weave together throughout literally decades of writing this story. And the creativity that is on display throughout this series is just so special. It is so unlike anything that is out there. I don't think anyone will ever be able to replicate the magic of this series. It truly is an epic fantasy odyssey, and if you go in with that in mind, I feel like your reading experience will be a lot different than someone who goes in and thinks this is gonna be just a silly pirate anime. The world that Oda has created and the characters that inhabit it are just so special. The day that this series ends is going to be absolutely heartbreaking for me because I have formed such a connection to this series and I've made friendships through this series. I truly feel like this is just a one-of-a-kind thing that has really never been done before in history, and I don't think it will ever happen again. One Piece is just the journey of a lifetime. I will never stop loving it. Anyways, that is my current top 10 favorite sci-fi fantasy series of all time. I hope you enjoyed listening to me just ramble about them. I plan on getting back to posting regularly. I'm gonna try to post twice a week moving forward, so expect more videos from me soon. If you're still sticking around and you haven't done it already, subscribe, hit the like button, do all that stuff. Stick around, it's a great time here. And just as a little preview, the next video you can expect to me is probably going to be Sun Eater related because I'm reading Disquiet Gods right now and I just have so many thoughts, so I'm gonna try to put them all together into one video, like my thoughts about Sun Eater as a whole, and you can expect that probably pretty soon. But until then, I hope you're happy and healthy, I hope you're doing well, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye!